Let's take a look at the policy. You talked about how the White House favored options presented by the military and the CIA over more diplomatic moves with regard to Afghanistan, including even talking with the Taliban early on when the United States had the upper hand. This was a suggestion by Ambassador Holbrooke that we talked to the Taliban earlier on. What do you think are the biggest mistakes that the United States has made in Afghanistan, and can we overcome them?
Well, the biggest mistake, I think, was that we too quickly bought into the Iraq scenario for Afghanistan. The president very quickly committed to basically importing the strategy from Iraq into Afghanistan. And then the decision-making was made such as to not put any other really serious options on the table, because an alternate option of diplomatic end to the war, maybe his aides thought would make him look weak talking to terrorists without a victory. So I think the big mistake was to make Afghanistan war hostage of tactical decision-making based on domestic politics. But I think, we ended up making a decision we're going to leave Afghanistan. So we didn't win the war, and we didn't think it's necessary to create peace. We came up with a scenario that allows us to leave. Now that we've declared we're leaving, we have very little influence on every other actor's behavior, from the Taliban to Pakistan to Karzai to Iran, because they've already factored us out. We're not going to be a player in Afghanistan after 2014. We're not going to have enough troops to be a factor on the ground. So everybody's going to has already started pursuing their own policies in their own way.
One thing Ambassador Holbrooke advocated was greater rapprochement between India and Pakistan as a key ingredient to a better future for the whole region, Afghanistan in particular. Do you think that might be one positive sign given the election of Nawaz Sharif and his overtures toward India?
Well, I think what Holbrooke understood was that the situation in Afghanistan is a hostage to hostilities between India and Pakistan, because the Pakistanis think that the Karzai government is pro-Indian, that if they don't control southern Afghanistan, the Indians are going to set up shop over there. And therefore, they have a lot of phobias about Afghanistan that has to do with their strategic rivalry with India. It's not that Holbrooke thought he should solve the India-Pakistan dispute, but he thought that if you lessen the Pakistani anxiety about India in Afghanistan, and that you created some kind of a conversation and common ground on Afghanistan between them, it might give the United States more room to breathe in Afghanistan and get it right. So he tried to get them to talk about Afghanistan and nothing else. No Kashmir, no other border issues, but just about Afghanistan. I think by the time Holbrooke died, as I describe in the book, the two sides were warming up to this idea of a limited conversation on Afghanistan. Now, if there is a circumstance for them to have forward movement, it clearly benefits Afghanistan. And Nawaz Sharif was the architect of the so-called Lahore summit when he invited the Indian prime minister to Lahore, and then they agreed to open the border and the first bus service started. This is all before General Musharraf deliberately undermined the rapprochement by the Kargil war. So, Nawaz Sharif has credibility in India as a peacemaker, and now he has the mandate. So an Indian government can take him seriously because he won big, and therefore he may actually be able to follow through with whatever promise that he makes. And I think that's a positive outcome of the Pakistan elections.
With regard to the future of Afghanistan, given what you just described, are you at all optimistic about the future of that country and its ability to become stable and not be the haven for extremist groups like Al-Qaeda as it was before?
From what I've observed with Afghan people, I think they're enormously resilient and entrepreneurial. And I think they're very hopeful about ultimately being able to overcome the challenges they face. But I think they're also worried about the fast way in which we're leaving and the fact that many of those challenges are there. So it's not so much the return of Al-Qaeda that they fear, but it's the fact that the Taliban are still intact. The issues they were fighting over are still there. Pakistan's strategic interest in Afghanistan hasn't changed. Iran's strategic interest, India's strategic interest hasn't changed. The fear of minorities in Afghanistan towards the Taliban is still there. So all of the things that made Afghanistan fragile before 2009, before 2002, are still there. And that worries them, that we're leaving without having really fixed anything in the end. And therefore, even the gains they had under Americans over the decade that we were there don't necessarily seem permanent and are subject to erosion. And that's a big challenge for the people of Afghanistan. So I'm optimistic in their resilience, in their entrepreneurship, but I also do think that there are short-run challenges they have to overcome.